the church is not singling out same-sex couples, telling them they can't love each other. The Catholic Church is the only institution that's inviting same-sex individuals to love each other. The fact is that the word love is in great need of redemption because we've been taught to believe that sex equals love, and if you can't express love in a genital way, then you're being deprived of your capacity to give and receive love, which is just not true.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us another episode here at The Catholic Gentleman. We are so blessed that you've decided to take some time and join us. We are especially blessed to have an awesome guest expert to talk about a very necessary episode. And that guest expert is going to be Jason Evert. And Jason is a friend of both Devin and I. We are so glad that he has decided to join us. But before we get there, a shout out to our show's sponsor today. That's Exodus 90, that group of men that are constantly looking at innovative ways to help make men holy. We'll talk more about that later in this episode. So here we are again in the month of June, which, as you know, is the Sacred Heart of Jesus month. That's correct. But since we are in the world, and you are likely seeing a lot of people talk about pride, or as St. Gregory the Great called it, the queen of all sins. Pride is appearing in parades. It's appearing in your grocery stores. It's appearing on the digital media and even in billboards. But how are we as men supposed to deal with it? How are we supposed to engage with it? How are we supposed to live the truth against those who are flaunting and publicly displaying their sin as if it's a virtue? So stay with us. If you like what we're talking about today, please consider supporting The Catholic Gentleman. Head over to Catholic Gentleman Plus, where we come out every single month with new sessions, every single week with new content. We've got daily saint quotes that come directly to your inbox. We've got 13 sessions already available. So head over to CatholicGentlemanPlus.com if you're looking for a place to donate and looking for some great content for men. Please like and subscribe. So a brief comment on who Jason is, right? Jason has written dozens of books. He's written a book on pure manhood. He's written a book very pertinent for today's conversation, Men, Women, and Other? I guess there's no and, it just goes other, which is perfect, right, for this conversation today. He runs Chastity Project with his wife. They've spoken to over 1 million individuals in 6 different continents on human sexuality, quite literally any topic or conversation or question you could think of. Jason has been asked and he has answered it. He actually helped me in my journey. I don't think he knows that, but he's helped me in my journey when I was in the college trying to figure out this whole mess of life. And I found a friend in him through Chastity Project and the great work that they're doing there. So I'm uniquely blessed that he's decided to join us today. So Jason, how are you doing today?
Can't complain. Thanks so much for having me on the show.
It's just a blessing. And so any big speaking engagements that you've been up to? I know you had a situation there in Australia. I'd love to hear directly from the horse's mouth.
Yeah, Australia was quite the adventure. More recently, just got back from Focus training. So training the Focus missionaries, about 600 of them on human sexuality, gender, same-sex attraction. So just got back from that late last night. But before that, as you said, was over in Sydney, Australia. And I don't know what you heard, but it was quite the adventurous trip for me.
Wow. Yeah. Share a little bit more. What were they throwing at you?
Well, to be specific, tomato soup, but we can get there. So it started with, as I was flying out there, I started getting, some notices like, heads up, there's quite a bit of opposition on the ground. And I'm like, okay, par for the course. But then by the time I landed, it had just erupted into this just absolute dumpster fire. And a lot of the schools started to pull out. There's negative media coverage from their the mainstream TV shows and newspapers of this, transphobic, misogynistic, hate-monging Christian chastity traveling preachers coming to, tell our girls to be modest. And it's like, whoa, and what had happened is so many people were emailing and calling up the school saying, you need to cancel this presentation. Our children should not be subjected to these misogynist messages and outdated ideas of keeping themselves pure for some man. This is ridiculous. Getting just flooded. And so 3 schools are like, okay, we're out. Yeah, we're going to cancel the talk. We're going to have it live streamed. Any students who want to opt in. And then because they canceled, other schools jumped in and said, okay, well, we'll take the slot. So we're able to get to different schools. But as soon as they announced that they're canceling the thing, a group of self-proclaimed witches on Twitter who have 60,000 plus followers declared that they were the ones behind the whole thing. They said, we want to just declare we have a witchery win and victory because we were the ones flooding the schools. And, thank goodness. And it was just really nasty stuff. And so I took to Instagram and I'm like, hey, just want to ask everybody's prayers because it's getting kind of dicey out here. But I said, before I came on this trip, I consecrated the whole thing to Our Lady. And to think that a bunch of self-proclaimed witches are going to overturn her plans is like thinking a bunch of house cats can take on some Siberian tiger. So, God's going to have his way. The media took that clip and said, and showed it on nationwide TV, saying Jason Evert, the traveling chastity preacher, is hitting back against moms who don't want him to speak to their daughters. And then it clips and it said, if these witches think that they can like cancel these plans, that's like a bunch of house cats thinking they take on a Siberian tiger. It's like, wait a minute, no. I'm not saying the moms are witches. Like, I'm not calling myself a tiger. I don't even like cats, okay?
Wow.
But imagine you're a mom sitting home just watching the evening news, like, wow, what a jerk. Calling me a witch because I don't feel comfortable with my child hearing some message of hate. Like, my goodness. And then, so they started calling the hotels I was speaking at, threatening them, trying to get them to cancel. Then I had an event that had tickets, but you had to reserve it for 1,000 young adults, and it was free, but you had to reserve it online. So these witches start reserving all of the tickets. So no young adults could come to the presentation. So they had to put them back on registry. It was just nuts. And then the last talk, they were expecting something was going to go down. So as the presentation was going on, there was a priest there, and he told me he saw a couple people come in that looked a little bit fishy, and he kind of walked over and, hey, can I offer you all a seat? And the lady said, no, we want to stand. We're cold. We want to be warm. And he's like, okay, that's weird. And then he just kind of stays near him to see what's cooking. And as soon as I start talking, they start these rhythmic cantations and hexes and blasphemies and curses. And he can hear them, like blaspheming Our Lady, the Trinity, calling my name out in these hexes. And he said, okay, game on. And he pulls out his rosary. And so he starts counteracting what they're doing. And then at the end of my talk, they were setting up adoration, and I'm putting the mic down, and a guy come on stage, got past security, and literally dumped a can of tomato soup on my head in front of 1,000 people.
Wow.
And so as soon as it happens, I say, everybody, let's pray for our brother here. And everybody starts praying a Hail Mary over the guy. Security grabs him, and he starts trying to scream, but he can't. There's 1,000 people praying a Hail Mary, and he's trying to yell, but nothing is coming out. They drag him off, get him out off the property, and then he comes back later with 2 other guys with ski masks and hoodies on, trying to get back in. And there were some kind of special ops security guys who had to physically get in a fight with these people to get them off the property. And so it was quite the adventure, you could say. But just to see how seriously, one Australian told me, he said, "Good on you, mate." He said, "You're over the target." Meaning, like, you're kicking a hornet's nest. Like, you're really putting your finger on a wound here that these Catholic schools aren't Catholic. It's like, if I'm going to send my kid to Muslim, some, mosque, and then like petition, like, wait a minute, you're teaching him the Quran? You can't do that. That's what's going on here. And I think what was most eye-opening to me, I'll close on this, is someone was telling me they have a priest friend who is in England as a chaplain at a hospital. And this guy would always take care of the patients, the nurses, and he noticed there were always 2 women sitting in the cafeteria together, but they would never eat. And so he introduced himself one day and said, "Oh, I noticed you're always here, but you're never eating. Do you mind if I sit?" And they all go on ahead. He sits down and he said, "I noticed you're never eating, but you're always here." He said, "Could I ask, like, are you fasting? Are you religious?" And they said, "Yes, we're fasting and we are religious, but we're not Christian. We are witches and we are fasting for the destruction of Christian marriage." They take it more seriously than we do. So that's a basic recap on the last week and a half of my life.
Nice. You're living the life of a true witness. I mean, Benedict said that truth leads to witness, and witness leads to martyrdom. So
well, it's tomato soup. I mean, it could have been worse. I mean,
it's close. I mean, it's the color of blood,
cheddar or something. So
Wow. No, it's just life on the front line, Jason. I appreciate you sharing that. That is definitely something that I have not dealt with, but thank you for sharing. And I know, honestly, and that's just it. We're talking to a bunch of people diving in, listening here. They're like, I don't know what I would do in that situation. I don't know how I would handle that. I probably only have heard of stuff like that in movies, but didn't really think it was real. This might be one of the first times that they're actually hearing somebody that it's happened to directly. I mean, that's unbelievable, and praise God for the guy praying the rosary for you. I mean, that's for those protections. We all need them. So,
People were very gracious about it. You're like, oh, I'm so sorry that happened. And I'm like, look, I have 8 kids. I've had food thrown at me for 20 years straight. I'm like, this is what I look like at the end of a typical day. So like, we're good.
That's so
Could I get
funny.
a cheese sandwich with that?
Wow. I was recently got contacts sized for contacts, and the gentleman put contact in my eye, me not having ever done it myself. And he was like, well, that was pretty easy. Wow, you took that, there wasn't any issues. And I was like, well, I've got 6 kids that are shoving stuff in my eyes all the time. And I was like, this is not my first rodeo. So, wow. Well, so I want to actually shift, and I want to talk a little bit about getting back to the basics here, right? Because if we're being honest, inside the church, we've got fiducia supplicans, right? Which has been led to, gay blessings, whether intent or by practice or whatever, right? We've got Pope Francis, writing a foreword for Father James Martin's book and tying himself to that. We've got, and that's just inside the church, right? And then so when the majority of men aren't steeped in this, and they go to family and friends and they look out to the world, and maybe they have family and friends that are actually practicing these gay lifestyles. They see like it's being supported in the church now, maybe, but they don't feel comfortable with it. Like, let's get back to the basic, and let's just start right here. What is the church's teachings on those who are struggling with same-sex attraction, on homosexuality and the like? I'd love to just hear from the expert, kind of set it straight for our listeners.
Well, I think the first thing to always remember is, when I was in Australia, these headlines were like, he's anti-gay, he's against contraception, he's against this, he's against that. The church's teachings are not primarily against particular moral ills of the time. The church's teaching is primarily for something, for God's plan for human love and marriage, that we believe that marriage is something, that this lifelong exclusive commitment between one man and one woman that's ordered towards procreation and open towards life. We just believe that that's what it is. And so we don't believe that the church has the authority to redefine what marriage is. And people are like, well, what about marriage equality? Well, nobody believes in marriage equality, because if we really do, then it's like, well, then I can marry 2 women. Are you in favor of that? Or, maybe I'll marry one woman, but it's going to be kind of temporary. It'll be like, wed lease instead of wedlock. It's like, well, no, you can't do that. It's got to be permanent. Well, okay, it'll be permanent, but does it have to be exclusive? Like, instead of being monogamous, can we kind of be like just monogamish? Like, what's so magical about the number 2? If you could have love as a couple, can't we have it as a throuple? And like, you could see, like, we need to come up with an idea, like, what is marriage? That's really the core issue. Now, if you experience same-sex attractions, God loves you. Being attracted to somebody is not a sin. That's not a choice that you've made. You didn't choose to have these particular attractions. And so attractions aren't sins, but neither are they our identity. As soon as we identify ourselves by our sexual attractions, life would get confusing real fast. Because like, what would happen if I'm attracted to a woman who's not my wife? Like, is that my identity? Like, am I an adulterosexual? If I drive by a pornographic billboard and I think she's pretty, like, am I a pornosexual? Like, our identity is not who we're sexually attracted to. Our identity is that we're a beloved son or daughter of God. And so I think it's important those people who struggle with this realize there aren't just 2 options on the table, like gay pride or gay shame, like live in the closet out of fear that if anyone knew you had these feelings, they'd hate you, or come out of the closet, embrace your sexual attractions as your identity, forget about God, the church, and the Bible, and do whatever you want with your body. Gay pride or gay shame, make a pick. But the church would say, like, okay, this is a false dichotomy. There's another choice, which is chastity. Acknowledging that you experience these attractions, but not defining yourself by them, and choosing to embrace this virtue of chastity. And there are many people I know personally living this out who are actually happy. John Paul said chastity is the sure way to happiness. And so we have to show that the church is not singling out same-sex couples, telling them they can't love each other. The Catholic Church is the only institution that's inviting same-sex individuals to love each other. The fact is that the word love is in great need of redemption, because we've been taught to believe that sex equals love. And if you can't express love in a genital way, then you're being deprived of your capacity to give and receive love, which is just not true. And so that's kind of in a nutshell, what the church would say, but we can go off in any direction you like.
Yeah. I'm going to pass it to you, Devin. I want to hear your thoughts.
Okay, so it just raises a question in my mind, and I think all that's very powerful and very good. So is our identity, though, rooted? So my maleness, my masculinity, is that part of my identity?
Oh, absolutely. And that's revealed in and through your body.
So break that out for me. Create the distinction between what I'm attracted to the opposite sex and my masculine nature as God is created to be. So just so that we can be clear on what establishes an identity for a person.
No, very good. So the church would not teach that there's like 58 different types of persons, like Facebook would say. You could be L and G and B and T and Q and this. The Catholic Church teaches 3 types of persons, because a person is an individual substance of a rational nature. So it's a rational being. So we have divine persons, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. We have angelic persons, the angels and the demons. And then you have human persons made in the image and likeness of God, male and female. That's the breakdown of the 3 types of persons. Once we start concocting new forms of personhood based on our sexual attractions, I mean, the list could be infinite, but our attractions are part of our story, but they're not the cover story. Like, you know, when you introduce me, you didn't say, our guest today is Jason and he's straight. It's like, oh, come on. Like, yeah, I'm exclusively attracted to females, but like, that's page 57 of my book. It's not the cover story. So, and I think the people who do experience same-sex attraction, in particular guys, need to hear it said that your masculinity in God's eyes is not determined by who you're attracted to. I almost wish it was, because then I could say, wow, women are really pretty. I'm such a man. It's like, no, it doesn't work like that. Our masculinity is basically measured by how much we conform ourselves to Jesus Christ crucified, regardless of who we're attracted to. That's the measure of our manhood.
Excellent. Yeah. So, okay. So we're talking a lot about like theology, philosophy, but let's just try to get down to more of a personal, subjective kind of situation. Because I think that where we as men, we run into the obstacles is on paper, it all sounds right. On paper, it all looks right. But then when I'm confronted, say, with a sibling or a child or a relative who is, quote, married, unquote, to, let's say, guy to a guy, a woman to a woman. So we have got so many questions here. Should we attend the wedding, of something like that? How do we engage a person like that, especially when they look upon us as being bigoted? So I would love to get more into so there's 2 things. How do we respond to the ideology? And then how do we respond to the person?
Yeah. And that's a super important distinction, because when we make the ideology the whole issue, the person is just going to feel invisible, erased, attacked. It's the same thing with gender dysphoria. You've got to distinguish gender theory, which is a set of ideologies rooted in some very wrong philosophies and metaphysics, but from gender dysphoria, which is a very real experience that individuals struggle and suffer with. And if we treat like those things the same, and we're just going after gender theory, the person is just going to feel just erased and attacked. And so with same-sex attractions, we've got to be able to make that distinction. Okay, yes, there is unchanging teachings of the Catholic Church that we need to hold fast to and defend, but then we have this beloved family member who's identifying, perhaps as gay, lesbian, or whatever, wanting to enter into this marital relationship. What do we do there? And so the practical application of the church's teachings requires nuance. It requires boldness. It requires sensitivity. And so we need to be not just the mouth of Christ. Okay, this is what the church teaches. We have to be his ears. I think we have to be his eyes. I met a mom recently whose son was transitioning to a female identity. And obviously, sexual attractions are different than, gender dysphoria. But this guy was going through the whole transitions, mascara and all that. And the mom said, don't even come to my house if you're going to be dressed up with your long nails and your hair and all your eyelashes. She said, I won't even look at you if you come to my house. And she was a devout Catholic mom. I pushed her on it. And I said, well, don't you remember when Mary didn't want to look at her son either? And she's like, no. I said, well, don't you remember when they took him down off the cross and they placed his unrecognizable body in her arms? When her heart was pierced, she didn't want to look at her unrecognizable son, but she didn't take her maternal gaze of love off of him. And I said, your son is Jesus, and he needs your look of love now more than he's ever needed in his entire life. And looking at him with love is not affirming all his choices. It's just affirming the fact that you'll never stop loving him. And this woman just burst into tears because she did love her son, but she just didn't know how to respond, because for her, this isn't just my son's dressing differently. My son wants a surgery, and he's going to castrate himself, and I'm never going to have grandkids. I'm never going to have my wedding to dance with my son. And so her heart was torn to shreds, and she didn't know how to respond. So I think we've got to hold fast to what the church teaches. Hold on to reality with one hand, hold on to the other persons with the other hand, and don't let go of either hand. That's, I think, where Father James Martin falls into the error, is he's holding onto the hand of the person, but he's detaching from the unchanging truths. But to have truth without love and love without truth, it's just misguided mercy. It's false compassion.
Yeah. What a great divide. I really appreciate you breaking that out so succinctly, because it is, I was a professional trumpet player for years. I've got multiple degrees in music. I have a lot of friends that struggle with same-sex attraction, a lot of friends that are practicing, homosexuals, etc. And it was that truth right there of not accepting their sins and their lifestyles, not condoning it, but at the same time, not affirming it by how we are, by our words or our actions, but staying, like you said, connected to them. It's easier said than done, but at the same time, that's what we're called to do, because I want to get through in this episode the fact that we're still called to be Christ to these individuals. And how do we do that without just cutting them off from the church or cutting them off from truth? Because this is something that's so deeply seated within our lives, right? And the culture has just pushed upon these individuals this understanding that their identity is, who they're attracted to, period. And so we have so much to break through. So I really appreciate that. I want to shift. I want to talk a little bit about this ideology and this group think. I want to talk to you about, like, how are we as men supposed to combat that? It's in the digital space. It's everywhere. What are some of your suggestions for men who are engaging in the battle, if you will? Or maybe they're not, and maybe they're just sitting on the sidelines wondering, what the heck should I be doing to kind of combat in Pride Month this year? I'd love to get some of your thoughts just on that matter in general.
Yeah, there's a lot of directions to go in there. One thing I think that we've got to do is, if there are individuals in your life who experience same-sex attractions, don't treat them like a leper. Don't treat them like some second-class citizen in the church of just like, it's you people over there who have same-sex attractions versus us that kind of have it all together with our opposite sex attractions. Like, no. We're all in this together. All of us are a total mess.
Right.
And so we can't just look down our noses at them. And what I often find is that in these difficult dynamics within the family, sometimes it's the family rejecting the person who has same-sex attractions, and sometimes it's the person who has same-sex attractions or gender, dysphoria rejecting the family, meaning I'm cutting you off because you won't endorse however I want to live. And so sometimes the shunning is going in both directions. But I think John Paul II once said that God uses human friendships to lead hearts to the source of divine charity. Meaning friendship is a form of evangelization.
Amen.
We don't need to get that silver bullet argument. Like, this is why gay marriage is against God's law. Okay, let's try to lead in with the friendship and see where this goes, because it's going to be more of a marathon than a sprint. I think if I was just in the mountains in Colorado this weekend, and I'm driving, and we passed a place that had beef jerky, and I'm like, that sounds pretty good. And then we drove by another one. I'm like, I need to get one. And then we come by this third one. I'm like, there it is. And I pull over and I get the beef jerky. The first two businesses probably thought, okay, failure. But no, like, each one of them got me one lane over closer on the freeway when I finally pulled over. And you might be the first lane. Like, you're trying to witness and it doesn't seem like it works.
Amen.
Or you might be the third one and think, hey, I'm the one who did it. It's like, no. There were others before you loving this person. And maybe you won't see the fruit in one conversation, but with just constant patient love with the person, hopefully it'll bear fruit. Now that's, if you've got friends. Now, when it comes to things like family members or kids, I was at an NBA basketball game with my kids a while back. Cheerleaders run out, which is enough of a problem. But then one of them is a guy. Like, and my kids started laughing. They're like, oh, ha, because the guy had a full-on beard, but he was dressed up in like the little shorts doing all the booty dancing. And my kids thought it was some kind of parody. Yeah. And they're like, Dad, and then they realized nobody's laughing. And like, Dad, what's going on there? And I'm thinking, okay, like, I really wasn't planning on having a conversation of gender dysphoria with my 8-year-old on the way home from the Phoenix Suns game. But I was like, you know what? It's a teachable moment. I said, we're going to talk about it on the car ride home. And so we did. And so use these teachable moments with these rainbows and trans flags thrown in your faith 24/7. If your kid sees it and he asks, and it's obvious he can't dodge the question, use this as a teachable moment to explain the God's plan for love and how we should love these individuals rightly with truth and love.
So practically, is it demonstrating Christ's love to attend a gay wedding or not? Because I think that's where a lot of us as men let's just put it this way, men are competitors and we're definitely solution oriented. Yep. And so we want to know what the goal is. We want to know what the answer is. And so in my family, extended family members, we have a lot of same-sex marriages. Yeah. We have a lot of same-sex relationships. and, we try to befriend them. But at some point they're like, well, if you really loved us, you would attend this, our wedding. If you really loved us, you would, basically rejoice in the things that we're rejoicing in. And I just want to know, what is the demarcation, or is there one? Because this is where it gets a little confusing, because people will say, well, Christ ate and drank with tax collectors and sinners. And then they use that as akin to attending a gay wedding. Yeah. So is there a proper response? How do we respond to something like that?
Yeah, I pulled up a quote here while you were asking that from a woman who experienced same-sex attractions. And here's what she said. She said, "May I make 2 requests? Love me, but remember that you cannot be more merciful than God. It isn't mercy to affirm same-sex acts as good. Don't compromise truth. Help me to live in harmony with it." And so I think the nice. Truly Christ-like loving response is like, I cannot attend that ceremony because my presence there is an endorsement of what's taking place, which is not a sacrament, but a sacrilege. And so that's why I can't be there. But you know what? Can we have dinner tomorrow? And you're welcome. I love you. I'll send you Christmas cards and this, so you love them, but have a conversation with them. So you don't just kind of ghost them. No. Right. Have a loving conversation or write a loving letter explaining why, but that you still want to have room for them in your life. And this could create tension. It certainly will. They might resent you, but I want you to think not about avoiding short-term resentment. I want you to think about avoiding eternal resentment. And what I mean by that is I know a nun, and she gave this talk once where she gave this analogy. She said, imagine if you knew the gospel, you knew the fullness of it, and you never shared it with people out of fear of resentment. And then the final judgment happens. And let's say those people never encounter God and they end up damned. And then at the end of the world, there's this final judgment, and they see you on the other side of this chasm beside Christ. And then they look and they recognize you and like, wait a minute, you knew all along that he was the way, the truth, and the life. And you said nothing to me to dissuade me from this life. I mean, the shame that you would feel in that moment, of the resentment they would have towards you, of not having spoken the truth, that would be unbearable. And so, yeah, you might get some short-term resentment, but try to be clear as to your reasons. And who knows if their heart might realize, okay, we don't see eye to eye on this issue, but this person truly loves me, and I can respect the fact we have different opinions. Hopefully that would be the reaction, but you never know quite how it's going to be taken. But we have to stand truth for what marriage is. Mm.
Yeah, no, it's excellent. And I just think you just reminded me of the importance of learning how to be an individual that can actually have conversations with people, right? Mm-hmm. It's becoming fewer and farther between with the digital space where, if you live in comment sections, it's all just, exactly. Throwing junk. Who can shout the loudest? Can you use all caps better than the other person who uses all caps? Yeah. And there's just like this inability to actually have meaningful dialogues and peaceful and loving relationships with incarnational beings right in front of you. Mm-hmm. And we just see it happening all the time. And your comment on that just reminded me, if you're listening to this, you might be an individual that you don't even think you can have that, right? Because you're just not having meaningful conversations on a regular enough basis. And so I encourage you to, go to chastity.com and check out Jason's stuff, and then get off the internet and go have a conversation with somebody. But I want to take a step back because you brought up about your 8-year-old son, I believe. Mm-hmm. You said you had to have that conversation. Honestly, that's a big fear of mine. So I have 6 kids, oldest 12, youngest is 6-7 months. And so I tend to lean towards being overly protective in the sense of not wanting them to have to be exposed to this stuff too soon. But at the same time, I know they will. And so I'd love for you to actually dialogue about that, just because it struck a nerve with me is how do you talk to an 8-year-old? I have an 8-year-old son as well. How do you talk to an 8-year-old son about something like this? That's not actually like we were just saying, giving them even too much information, but at the same time, speaking to what they just ran into or what they're just struggling with. I'd love for your breakthrough on that.
I think step number one would be to be proactive rather than merely reactive. And so at bedtime, dear Jesus, thank you for making Joseph a boy, and may you bless him to grow to be a strong man. And so you're doing prayers that affirm the reality of their sexual identity and how incredibly good it is that God created them that way. So that's kind of the front-loaded version of being proactive about their sexual identity. But then what do you do when you have to be reactive? I was shopping with my kids at IKEA, buying one of my teenagers a cheap piece of furniture. And we go to this little cafeteria there where they've got these cheap little meatball meals. So we go there and we get in this like cafeteria line. And the guy serving the meatballs is presenting as female, but he's clearly not passing, so to speak, in terms of having a convincing appearance as a female. And my kids spotted immediately because like this guy's got hairy arms and big knuckles and a jawline, but he's got longer hair and he's got mascara and fingernail polish. And my kids were like jarred by the whole thing. And the guy walked away around the corner. And one of my kids was like, Dad, what do we do? Do we make fun of him? Like, what do we do? I said, no, you don't. You watch when he comes back and I'll show you what you do. And so they were all eyes. And he comes back and I said, hey, how are you doing today? You having a good day? And I just started talking to him. I started having a conversation with him. I was looking him in the eyes. I was just trying to like brighten the guy's day as we walked down the line. Thank you for the food. I hope you have a good night. And I just totally treated him like as an absolute human being instead of some spectacle in front of my boys. And then we went and sat down with our food and we talked it over about, okay, there's something called gender dysphoria. And what that means is that when a person is confused about who they are as male or female, because, maybe they were under this pressure that if you're a real man, you're into drinking beer and shooting deer and watching NASCAR. And they thought, well, I'm not into those things. Like I like theater and I like dance and I like art. Yeah. Well, maybe I'm just not one of the guys. And so they start thinking that because they don't fit these stereotypes of what it means to be a man, that they're just not part of the club. And that's really unfair because there's lots of ways to be a man and there's lots of ways to be a woman, but your body isn't the problem. Like nobody's born in the wrong body. We're born into this wrong culture that's telling us that we might have to hurt our bodies in order to be ourselves. So your body doesn't need to be reconstructed. It's this culture that needs to be reconstructed. And so, I try to explain that in an age appropriate manner of you treat these people with love, you pray for them, but God made you good because he made us all good. And so, and then if they have questions, hey, this is not going to be just like a one-time talk. This is like a conversation. This is hopefully going to continue for years because it's going to be a part of their life. They're going to see it popping up in the media, billboards, this or that. And they just want to always know that, you can all come to Dad if you're confused about this stuff and we can have a great conversation and I'll listen to the questions you have.
I want to take a moment and thank today's sponsor. Men, have you checked out Exodus 90 lately? If you've heard of Exodus 90, you're probably thinking Lent and cold showers, but the Exodus 90 app offers so much more. It's a daily companion to help you grow closer to God and to become the man he wants you to be. Download the Exodus 90 app now so you can grow in your devotion to the Sacred Heart of Jesus during the month of June, which is the month of the Sacred Heart. I've been following along with the app's daily scriptures, reflections, and prayers dedicated to the Sacred Heart of Jesus, and it's awesome. On the app, you'll learn more about the new Exodus 90 Summer Book Club. And I want to invite you to join the new Exodus 90 Summer Book Club to read Chastity, Reconciliation of the Senses by Bishop Eric Varden, which is a great book. We often view chastity as a prohibition, something that drains life out of us. But Bishop Varden shows us just how genuinely human and life-giving Christian chastity should be, leading to the healing and true love. It's a refreshing and beautiful take on this most important virtue. Go to exodus90.com/CatholicGentleman for a free 14-day trial to the Exodus 90 app and to learn more about the Exodus 90 Summer Book Club. Again, check out exodus90.com/CatholicGentleman or click on that link in the show notes and join us for a great summer read. God bless. Excellent. I think that's so good because the one thing that men are prone to do is just try and shut it off, right? If they don't feel like they can have that conversation, they just close the door and, you're too young or something along those lines. And I agree with you that you don't have to just be overly obvious. Yeah. You can have that dialogue with them at where they're at. Ask those questions. Excellent point. So thank you, Jason.
Yeah. They need to witness our interaction with these people in love.
Sure.
Otherwise, they have no clue how to respond. And so what they need to see is like, okay, Dad's comfortable talking to this person as a person, not as a problem. And Dad loved that guy, even though he was really different than Dad. Okay. That stuff to me is what's going to sink, is seeing the witness more than just receiving the catechesis.
Yeah, and what's so powerful about that is that it flips everything kind of on its head, because the person who's conveying that, they are trying to identify themselves with this sex change, and yet you are affirming the deeper person and you're looking past that.
Yeah.
And it's very interesting. And so when somebody receives that truly, like they receive your love, your affirmation, there's more of a tendency in them to be more open to saying, hey, that person actually loves me for me, not for this so-called identity.
Yeah.
And so I think it can kind of flip it. So I got a question for you though. Sometimes I'll mention like, so say you have a rose, and that rose, if you spray paint it gold, you know, because you want a gold rose, it looks gold, it appears to be gold, but you've just killed the rose, you know? And I don't know if it's a good analogy or not, but I feel like, or I think that with the hormone therapy, with the genital mutilation, that's kind of what we're doing. We're spray painting an overcoat on this, and we're actually killing the person, because this is my theory, is that when you tell somebody that they can be anything they want to be, and it appears that the sky's the limit, but there's a glass ceiling. Like if I wanted to be a woman and I went through all the therapy, the hormone therapy, the genital mutilation, no matter how much I look like a woman, I still can't be a woman. I cannot become impregnated. I cannot nurse. I cannot give birth. Yeah. And therefore I cannot fulfill the totality of motherhood and being a wife, etc. And so I think that that's the torturous nature of this ideology, is that you tell someone that they can be something that they really cannot be. It's like telling me I can be an NBA basketball player. You know, I'm 5'6" and I can barely shoot, you know, and, you know, I'm working my life, you know, to be that NBA basketball player. Good luck, you know? Yeah. And I think that promising someone that and holding that out to them is torturous, rather than promising them and holding out to them that they could be a true son or daughter of God, which is most fulfilling, is more the answer. I don't know. What do you think about all that?
Yeah, and that's why the power of language is so important, because what they're referring to is like gender affirmative care. Like, why wouldn't you want to affirm somebody's gender identity? Right. What are you going to do? Conversion therapy against the person? Like, wait a minute. Okay, let's look at language here. We're calling it conversion therapy to help a young person feel comfortable with their own body. And we're calling it affirmative care to mutilate them with hormones, cross-sex hormones, puberty blockers, and surgery. That's affirming them. But conversion is like, this isn't like, who is it? Ryan Anderson said it's an Orwellian misuse of language. Yeah. And so, but I remember reading one person who had, you know, I think they were transitioning and then they detransitioned. And essentially what they said is, if you adults are going to like affirm them in their delusion by using the wrong pronouns and this and that, he said, what you're going to do by sealing the deal of saying, yep, we're on board of this, their body will never be more than just an endless source of disappointment to them. Because you can't change your sex, because every cell of the human body is sexed. I mean, they found more than 6,000 sex-specific genes. I mean, your arteries are male or female, your esophagus is male or female. You'd have to swap out every cell of the body in order to change your sex. Now, someone going through this might say, look, I'm not trying to change my sex. I know I'm not changing my chromosomes. I just want to look how I feel. And what's so wrong with that? And so what's pushing this at the very base level is a desire to feel at home in their body. And oftentimes there's a dissociative disorder going on as a trauma response. I remember meeting one girl, and her sister is getting a double mastectomy and, you know, identifying, I think, as non-binary, you know, or trans male. And she asked their sister why she was going through all this. And they had been abandoned by their dad as little girls. And the girl undergoing the surgery said, you'll see. She said, I'm going to be a better man than dad ever was. And it's like, whoa. I mean, the layers of what's underneath this thing is why Western European nations and Scandinavia, Norway, Sweden, Finland, Amsterdam, England, even France is now on board, are banning puberty blockers. They're backtracking on all this stuff. They are changing their entire course. Those are the guys who started the whole thing in Amsterdam. And now they are far more conservative than we are in the US, Canada, Spain, and Australia. It's like we have this GPS. There's a 52-car pileup a quarter mile ahead with 20 casualties. What do we do? Cruise control? Let's just drive right into it. That's what we're doing as a culture.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah. So what is it that Amsterdam has discovered?
Well, what they discovered is that there is a very poor evidence base that these things are actually helpful for young people. I mean, if you read the patient insert packet for puberty blockers, it says that this drug will cause crying, irritability, instability, increased self-harm, increase in depressive symptoms and suicidality. That's the side effects of the drug. And they're saying if we give it to them, it's going to stop these things. The girls who take puberty blockers become more likely to self-harm after going on the puberty blockers. And then you look at like with Sweden, they did the biggest study ever on the long-term health outcomes of individuals who surgically transition and found that after a year or two, a lot of people are happy about it. Following about 8-10 years down the road, their suicide rate spikes to 19 times higher than the general population.
19 times.
And for the female to male transitioners, it's more than 40 times as high. And what they discovered is that 42% of people in the trans community actually meet the criterion for an autism diagnosis. There's a lot going on beyond you're trans, so you need to transition. I mean, the biggest gender clinic in the United Kingdom was just shut down about a month and a half ago. They fractured it into smaller clinics that actually focus on mental health because the bigger clinic didn't have the mental health, professionals there. They had psychologists, but all they were trained to do was just help people in the transition. I mean, they only audited this patients once. 125 of the kids coming in found out that 98% of them had comorbidities of other mental health disorders, but they didn't have the staff to treat it, so they just transitioned the kids. Now the kids are coming back suing the pants off of these clinics, and that's what's changing things.
Yeah, I was listening to this doctor the other day talking about how many people have come to him wanting to have, sex transitional surgeries, go through the hormonal therapy. And what he would do is actually do panels on their hormones as is, and find out what they're lacking, they have too much of as far as hormonal imbalance and things like that. And then he'd work from that point, from a natural holistic level. And he said 10 out of 10. Every time they don't want to have the sex change. They don't want to go through the process. Because so much of it is, I understand we have to be sensitive to the individual, but there's a lot of things attacking the mind, creating a mental disorder, depression and anxiety. The hormonal imbalance causes the body, in a sense, to attack the person. And so when we can address those problems first and primarily, we have a much better chance at actually just actually helping the person reasonably.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense because there are conditions in which female embryos are exposed to a lot more testosterone within the womb. And these females tend to prefer male stereotypical play, tend to be more tomboyish in their behavior. And so such a girl being raised in this climate of, well, if you like what the guys like, you're probably one of the guys, is much more likely to self-identify as male or non-binary. But if she has a good endocrinologist that can work with her and explain, hey, look, this is actually what's going on. And the fact that you prefer these types of, rough and tumble play or this and that is not an indication you're one of the guys. This is what's going on hormonally. And you're just living in this cultural milieu that's telling you were born into the wrong body, but you were not. So yeah, having a doctor like that, it would be a nice gift to have. But unfortunately, a lot of the doctors and even counselors are told, look, if you don't do this affirmative model, then you could lose your license for counseling because you're doing conversion therapy on the kids. So a lot of counselors are afraid to speak up because then they'll lose their practice.
Yeah.
Can you explain just a little bit about the dissociative disorder? I know you brought that you just mentioned it in passing, and I think that it's important for people to just kind of wrap their minds around that and put some definition to what people are experiencing. I'd love to hear that.
Yeah, I think of one individual I know personally who was sexually abused as a child by his uncle. And he eventually started identifying as female, went through the entire surgical procedure. And it wasn't until he was like in his 60s or 70s that he detransitioned. And he found a psychologist that was able to say, actually, what was going on for you was dissociative disorder, where you had a trauma response that when faced with a threat, you can, flight, fright, freeze, or whatever. And flighting, in a sense, from this, you're dissociating from the trauma, that part of my body of that I don't want to be associated with. I remember reading of some girl that had been sexually abused, and she was in the room with her brother when it happened, and the uncle did it to her. But the uncle didn't touch the boy, only her. And she realized from that, if I had been a boy, this never would have happened to me. And so many young women who are starting to receive a lot of sexual invitations, particularly from older guys, as young adolescents who may be going through pubertal development a little bit early, will often conceal evidence of their sexual maturation as a defense mechanism. I'm going to put a binder on. I'm going to look a little bit more tomboyish because that's going to make me safe from what they could do to me or what that guy did to me. Because if I didn't have those body parts, he wouldn't have wanted me in the first place. And so I remember reading a girl, Ohio State University. She had been raped. And she said, I couldn't wait to get my breasts off after I had been raped. And she went through top surgery and, as identifying now as non-binary. It's like, wow, because it's like, how do I deal with this trauma as a young person, as a young adult? My body must have been the problem. That's what caused this whole thing. If I didn't have these parts, then I would have been protected. So it's really important that we're listening to gender dysphoria with kind of a reverent curiosity. Where is this coming from? Because it's very often a roadmap to the person's healing if we can actually get to the root of where this stuff is coming from. And I don't want to make false promises that if you just figure out where it came from, it's all going to go away. Because it doesn't always work like that. But to have compassion on yourself for where these desires are arising.
Yeah, exactly. Get curious about those desires. I agree. So you mentioned now you've got these other countries that are banning these, puberty blocking drugs and things like that. Do you feel, and this is just something that when I was prepping for the show, I was thinking, do you feel like there's a certain degree of cultural backlash against the Pride Month, against how far it's been taken? Am I just reading too far into that? I'd love to get your thoughts on the feeling of is it taken a step back? Has it pushed it beyond its limits? And then honestly, with that last comment, was it intentional to push it beyond its limits so that we ignore all the other things that that are being shoved at us?
Yeah, I honestly think the tide is going to turn precisely because of the lawsuits. Because when you rebel against human nature, nature always wins. It's just always victorious in the end. And what they're finding is that what they thought might be safe for these kids is extraordinarily harmful. When you put a girl on T or testosterone, her risk of heart disease quadruples. She'll have to have her uterus surgically removed within 5 years because of the increased risk of endometrial cancer. Puberty blockers don't just pause puberty, they pause neurological development, they're pausing bone development. But the problem is, if you skip bone development as an adolescent, you can't recoup that later on. It's like, okay, I'm 24 now. Now I want to develop, my bones. You missed the window. So we've got 15-year-old kids in the trans community who are developing osteoporosis like an 80-year-old woman. Their knuckles are breaking, their bones, their knees are and they're having hip replacement surgeries before they even have a driver's license. And so what we're battling against is a lot of money. I know one woman who is going through the whole transitioning thing, and she added up all her medical bills that insurance has covered. And the total bills just for her alone was more than $1 million for one single person. And so we're dealing with massive pharmaceutical giants that are making absolute bankroll over this. Planned Parenthood has gotten involved in the whole business scheme of it. So it's all going to come down to the shareholders. When are they going to lawsuits outweigh the income that's coming in? And when you hit that tipping point, that's when things tend to change. So I think these lawsuits for sure are going to flood in and change things.
Powerful. Yeah. So, it's interesting, the prodigal son account. I love the fact that the prodigal father, it doesn't say that he sees his sinful son or he sees a sinner, but he saw his son and then he runs to him. And I wonder how we as men can do that. Like you were talking about it earlier, but how we can actually run to the person and not be so scared of how they're handling their body image. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And because I think as men, we're not relational as much as women.
Yeah.
So that creates a real problem for us, because when you have someone, let's say a man who's thinks he's female or is trying to be female, immediately there's a disruption just in us. We just know it's not right. But then to be able to relate, I'm already at a disadvantage in being relational, like a woman is. Yeah. But then to try to overstep that and overcome that and be relational and see the person, man, what do you say to guys, like any tips on how to do that? Because I think that that's a great challenge for a lot of us.
Yeah. And I found with bonding with my kids, the girls tend to bond better kind of face to face. You know, let's have dinner together and talk. Whereas with my boys, it's like, let's go out in the woods, let's go shed hunting and find some antlers in the woods. And so we're kind of side by side, and it's just more natural bonding mechanism. So we do kind of have to step out of our comfort zone a little bit. I was emailing back and forth with a middle-aged Catholic guy who's wrestled with gender dysphoria his whole life. And I said, hey, I know you're in Louisiana. I'm coming out for some talks. Do you want to kind of meet up and do dinner? And he said, I'd love to. The guy drove almost 2 hours just to have dinner with me.
Wow.
And we sat down, and I'm telling you, I didn't talk 1% of the conversation. I mean, he literally—
That's hard to believe.
Yeah. But no, I did it. I accomplished it. But I mean, if you had a transcript of our conversation, 99% him, 1% me. And it was great. I didn't walk out of there being like, oh, I didn't get the chance to disprove gender theory. Yeah. I got to walk away from that knowing that he left that restaurant feeling like, that dude listened to me. Church has ears. That was my goal. I just want him to walk away knowing the church has ears, because that to me is going to pay more long-term dividends.
Amen.
Yeah. When people feel loved, they're more apt to want to be like the one who is loving them. So that this is the whole Christian narrative. When we really believe in Christ and we believe that we're loved like Christ, by Christ, we want to be like Christ. Yeah. So when you step in the person of Christ and you're loving as Christ, whoever it is, whether I'm wrestling with temptations toward adultery, or I'm struggling with heroin, or I'm struggling with same-sex attraction, whatever it is, I want to be like the one who is actually truly loving me, because at the bottom of all this is what I believe. At the bottom of all this, everybody is longing to be loved. Yeah. They just don't know how to get there. Yeah. And so then somebody like you comes along in the image of Christ and loves properly, listens, cares. And they're like, I want to be like that guy. I want to be like that. I want to love like that person. I want to receive that love. I think that that's what kind of like jars us and awakens us from our stupor of sin.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think back, if I remember you doing a talk once talking about when you hit a home run as a kid, you were looking at the stands to see the approving eyes of your father, looking upon that. I mean, the deepest desire of the human heart is just to be seen and to be loved. And I think if they don't feel seen, if they don't feel heard, the guy said to me, he said, you know what you do when no one's listening to you? You scream.
Yes.
And that's why you have these anaphylactic reactions to when you question gender theory. It's like, no one's listening to me. That's why I have to scream to be heard. And so we failed them in many respects, that we have just treated them like some heresy that needs to be disproved instead of a person that just needs to have coffee with you.
Well, and the screaming comes out in the over accentuated dress, the changing of the physical features. That's the screaming. I want you to see me. I want you to love me. Yeah. Look at me. Look at me. And this is what, like my family, they were Christmas shopping and they went to the mall, and there was a guy who literally had so much makeup and was that face sculpting, and all this stuff. And it just looked like a parody of a parody of a parody. Yeah. And it frightened my daughters. Yeah. And my daughters, they're great, but they love people, but they were frightened by this guy, the way he looked. Yeah. And yet what had happened is nobody's noticing me at this level. Nobody's loving me. I guess I just need to step it up a little bit more. I remember at a church, there's this woman who tanned. And I don't know if you know people who tan a lot, but they might skip a couple days and then they look in the mirror and they're like, gosh, I'm looking pale. And then they tan even more. Yeah. And then pretty soon they look like an orange, right? And it's because they've lost touch with the reality and nobody said anything. Yeah. So they're screaming a little louder. And I think that you've nailed it. If we can offset that by listening, just by making eye contact, caring about the person, being present, but that's very hard for us guys. But if we can do that, they might not scream as loud. Yeah.
No, it's very true. It's a silent scream of a different nature.
Yeah. Wow. Powerful.
So Jason, something that it's pretty sobering, this conversation, and it's clear that you know a ton about this. And so that if a man or a woman that's struggling with gender dysphoria or same-sex attraction comes and talks to you, you're equipped, if you will, to talk about them. What do you think we as men have an obligation in 2024 to be doing do you think we should be learning more about these things? Do you think we should be versed on having these conversations? I again, just would love to hear that. And then any suggestions that you would start making for men, because we can't ignore our times. We can't ignore the reality of where we live. And I know that there's a whole group of individuals that's all about forming communes and staying away from the culture. I think it's very unchristlike out of fear. But that being said, what is exactly? But what is some of your suggestions about learning, and then if we should be, where should we be going?
Yeah, I mean, that approach is tragic because the parents are like, oh, what is the culture going to do to my kid? It's like, no. What is your kid going to do to the culture? Like that's what confidence Christians should be bringing. And so when they hold themselves up, I mean, what a poverty that is for the world to be deprived of the witness of those families. I mean, just seeing them shopping, at Costco. I mean, we flew yesterday we had 7 of our 8 kids and my wife and I on an airplane. And it was an absolute, I mean, it was nuts. I mean, getting all the kids in, the backpacks, but everybody at the plane just had to see a big family, of just a witness. It's like watching a nun walk through the airport in a habit. Like you can't not think of something. But in terms of the role that we should have as men, I saw an image once I really liked. You had a guy in the military, like some special ops kind of guy, just real built. And he's carrying in his arms this mother and the mother has a baby in her arms. And then the husband is walking beside them and they're like, waist deep in this flooded water. And the soldier is holding the wife and the baby. And the dad has like a little backpack and some red shoes in his hand. And the meme just said, don't be the guy holding the red shoes. And it was like, whoa, it was so powerful because that guy was overweight, totally out of shape, probably couldn't even pick up his own wife and kids, needed to be rescued by this army guy. And so the idea is you have been given strength to serve and you better be able to protect your family. And so, I think a guy should be in the gym. Look, you don't have to know jujitsu and how to roll on the mats, but you got to be able to protect your family if you need to. That's just part and parcel of the nature of manhood. Okay, but what about your duty as a son of the church? I mean, your grandkids are going to be like, Grandpa, you were there when that whole thing was going on in the world. What did you do? What did you say? And you're like, I kind of stayed quiet because I didn't want to be called a transphobe. It's like, no, you better have a story to tell how you got into the fray. You saw the smoke and you ran into the building instead of being like, I don't want to have to stop, drop, and roll, so I'm going to kind of keep my distance. It's like, no, the Marine sees the smoke and he runs towards the smoke. And so, intellectually, you have to learn, okay, what are the issues with gender theory? And, is there such a thing as a trans brain? And so we've created resources to help people instead of having them to do all the research. And so at chastity.com, we've got books we've come out on this subject. The one that you mentioned is Male, Female, Other, A Catholic Guide to Understanding Gender. I mean, get this stuff. But ultimately, you learn the most by having the conversations, not just by reading peer-reviewed journals. It's got to be both.
Excellent. Yeah. No, I appreciate that. We'll put that all in the show notes. I love that. What is our duty as the son of the church? That is such a great statement. And I feel called to that. I think that's why we bring these podcasts every single week, is because we're calling men to this duty as sons of the church. And it's the month of June. It's so obvious because it's slapping us all in the face wherever we are. It's going there, and I think, instead of getting angry and instead of getting, just impatient and frustrated and then just locking the doors, what can we be doing proactively, right? To be leading the charge? Because I feel like that's what, unfortunately, a good majority of individuals in the church have done, is they've lost so much ground that they just retreat to the point where, how are they ever going to take it back? And so I guess that's another question for you is, do you see us taking back ground in this area? And if so, what are you trying to do to take back ground? And what do you encourage us to be doing in addition to just the conversations with those that are struggling that we might directly know and be in contact with?
Yeah, well, I think the culture right now, the good is getting better and the bad is getting worse at the same time. There's kind of a polarization. I think things are going to get worse in this area before they get better. But the media has a lot of sway on public opinion, on where people actually stand on this subject, of thinking that, most people are really on board with it. That's not the case. I mean, look what happened to the stock of like Bud Light and Target after they pulled the stuff they tried. I mean, it just tanked by billions. And so what that tells me, most people are not on board with this. They're only staying quiet because it's socially or economically expedient to do so, because they know if I say anything, I'll get fired, so I'll just kind of shut up. Most people aren't on board with this stuff. And so I think the pendulum is going to swing back. And we are being given right now this epic opportunity to rediscover, what does it mean to be a man? What does it mean to be a woman? I mean, the very fact that our culture is even asking that question is a sign that we've come to a point where, like Vatican II said, when God is forgotten, the creature itself grows unintelligible. So we've lost sight of supernatural reality, so we can't even see natural ones. So I think, this is an incredible opportunity. And the response that's needed is that the closer I get to God, the more authentically masculine I become. And what's needed more than anything is little holy families. I mean, that's why it's so under attack, because it's the weapon. It always has been. That the holy family is how God brought redemption in the first place, and he doesn't change his ways. I mean, I think of the movie Maverick, the Top Gun thing that came out a couple summers ago. The whole plot of the movie, just destroy the enemy's weapon. That's what the devil's doing to the family right now. That's the weapon, is the family. That's why, all the guns are pointed at it right now.
Yeah. That's a good movie too. Yeah. Sorry, Devin, go.
So you're hitting on it. And I think this is just my opinion, but I'd love to get your take on this. The family is so central to this because the family is the icon, as JP2 would say, that reveals and reflects the identity of God, right? And I think that the identity of God is distinction, unity, and fruitfulness. These are the three marks. So distinct persons, that unity, fruitfulness. So God says, let us make man in our image and likeness, distinction, male, female, not homo, hetero, and then unity. They come together in one flesh union, and then there's life and love and bliss and all that. Well, I just wonder, is this Satan's kind of move to create an anti-Trinity? And this is where it gets complicated for me, because I see the ideology. If that's the ideology, I see it. I see it very clearly. However, what I don't want to do is just lump that person or those people into that satanic ideology. But it's very hard to make the demarcation when everybody's waving their flags in our faces and telling Christians to, basically, so what's your opinion on that Trinitarian idea? First of all, that idea of the Trinitarian identity in the family and in marriage, but then second of all, distinction, unity, fruitfulness, but then second of all, that ideology, and then the confusion of how we're supposed to attack the ideology, I think, yet not attack the person.
Yeah. I mean, great point. I mean, in terms of the person versus the ideology, we need to remember these individuals going through this are not, for the most part, culture warriors that are trying to deconstruct gender. Most of them are not culture warriors. They're casualties of the culture
victims.
war.
Yeah.
There you go.
Keep that in our minds and hearts. Now, but I totally agree. Gender ideology is basically the counterpunch to John Paul's teaching of the spousal meaning of the body. That our bodies are not meaningless, our bodies are meaningful. And so if the human body and the love of a man and a wife is this sign of God's, not only how he loves us, but who he is in and of himself, the devil's going to want to do everything he can do to absolutely obscure that. And so I think without a doubt, that's what's going on. Because if male doesn't really mean anything, then neither does man, neither does husband, neither does father, neither does priest, neither does family. Everything now is thrown to the wind. And that's why John Paul said we've been given a task to rediscover the meaning of our bodies.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That's so good.
Agreed.
I love it.
No, it's excellent. And I'm going to bring us back to that call because I had to look it up real quick. But what Paul VI said in his Evangelii Nuntiandi, where he said, the signs of the times should find us vigilant, either tacitly or aloud, but always forcefully we are being asked, do you really believe what you are proclaiming? Do you live what you believe? Do you really preach what you live? The witness of life has become more than ever an essential condition for real effectiveness in preaching. And Jason, when you were just saying that, that's exactly what I heard. So I'm so grateful for that. You triggered that in my mind, is that as a father, as a husband, as a man, by living our identity, by living as a family in this world, we are evangelizing the world by our very presence, right? That you mentioned, you brought up Costco a couple of times. Yeah. When I go to Costco as a father, as a husband with 4 of my 6 kids, guarantee you I am evangelizing everybody, that I'm walking by. And you get a lot of women that are just, and usually, and you've experienced this too, I'm sure, Jason, is they're hostile towards the mom with all the kids, but they're generally like in awe when it's the father with all the kids. And you'll get women coming up to you and just saying, oh, I wish I had more. I get that a lot. Yeah. But that's what our culture needs. And I think you bring up the great thing is that by by living our identity as a man in this world, but first understanding what that is, and then being willing to go forth in that truth, in love with Christ as our leader, we evangelize the world. And it doesn't have to be this equation or this quadratic formula, right, that we are fighting with, but that we are being proactive. And as you stated, the more we become closer to God, the more we become closer to Christ, the more we're capable of living that message out. So thank you. I think it's just such a great point. So, Jason, what are you up to? What are people can do? I think we're at a point here in the conversation. I want to make sure you have time to promote all the great work you're doing and where men can go to learn more from you.
Yeah, well, first, I share your Costco experience. I know COVID was kind of fun because it was the first time in Costco that everybody finally looked like we did because everyone was stockpiling. They're stockpiling. I'm like, no, this is just Tuesday, okay? It's going to be done in just a few days. But it is fascinating. Like, I've had my wife at Costco, and there were a couple of women behind her who kind of just scowled at her and said loud enough for my wife to hear, like, ugh, who would ever want to do that with their life? And it's like, whoa. Yeah. And then I go and I get like, congratulate. Oh, are you sitting the kids today? I'm like, no, I'm not sitting. I'm fathering. Okay. I'm not a babysitter. Be who you are is the answer. But in terms of our resources, like we've got a website, chastity.com. If you go to chastity.com/gender, it kind of houses a lot of the information we have on that subject, including the male-female other book. We've got a podcast called Lust is Boring, and we've had lots of experts on this subject there, from endocrinologists to specialists in pediatric medicine, psychologists, people wrestling with them themselves. And, we do these episodes. We did one interview with Chloe Cole, who's a prominent detransitioner, had puberty blockers, I think 13 cross-sex hormones, 14 double mastectomy after that, and then detransitioned at the age of 16. And now she's a tremendous advocate. She's testified before Congress. She's changing legislation. And so she's just an awesome, culture warrior for the truth of being male and female. And so
Jason, let me jump in here. Your episode with Bishop Varden was next level. Yeah. It was so good. And so thank you for that. I'm going to put that episode you just mentioned and the episode with Bishop Varden in the show notes. Continue, because I know you've got fundraisers and things like that. But
well, first email me. I'll give you his email because I would love to have him chat with you guys as well. I mean, that conversation was lit, not because of me, but because, man, to have this monk contemplating this virtue of chastity through the lens of the early desert fathers. I mean, that, like you said, that episode is gold. One of my favorites.
It was.
But yeah, we are doing a fundraiser right now at chastity.com. We want to give the new book on gender to every single priest in America. So we've already given it to every single bishop, every single college campus minister, and every single high school Catholic theology chair in the country. Nice. But sending it to every priest is a big ticket. It'll cost us $80,000. That's the at cost. There's no profit built into that. To just get the books, ship them to every priest in America, because we want to be kind of arms dealers, that we've got these boots on the ground, but they're kind of an unformed militia. I mean, there's no priest who went to the seminary and learned how to offer pastoral care to non-binary junior high kids in their parish school. Like, they didn't get training on this, and their bandwidth is thin in terms of how many things they have to do. So let's do the research. Let's give them the book, and then they can use that to help form and protect the parish. And so chastity.com/donate is if anyone wants to make a gift to support that mission. But we've raised about 50,000, so we got about 30,000 to go. And then we're just going to ship it out to all the priests for free.
Praise be to God. Well, hopefully some of our listeners can help you. I'll put all of that in the show notes. If it was a URL that was mentioned on this show, you can find it in the show notes. So I'm just so grateful. Jason, what a blessing. You are in our prayers. I'm just so thankful. Thanks for joining us today.
No, it was an absolute joy. Keep up the wonderful work, because guys need to see this, because men don't learn manhood from books. They just learn it from men. And I know I've been blessed by the conversation, the stuff you guys have said that I'm going to chew on in my own life. So keep up the awesome work.
Oh, thank you, Jason. So as we end each of our episodes,
be a man, be a saint.